Thank you for taking time to visit with us today and give us some information about you and your work. We want to be sure it is okay with you for us to record this interview and to use it on the Sachse Historical Society's website and other forms of media. Is that okay with you?
Yes, it is.
All right. Would you please give us your name?
Jim Becker.
Would you like to tell us about your wife, your children, and other family members?
Well, I'll say just a little bit about my wife, Marie Zakowski, and of course many people around town here know her as well because she's been involved in a number of activities in town and in the time since we've been here.
And do you have any children? And
No, she and I are the only family members that are in this area at all.
Okay, well, I know you're moving before long, which we're going to miss you, but we'll get into that just a little bit. Would you tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up?
Okay. I was raised in western New York State. I was actually born in the village of Silver Creek, and we lived a couple miles outside of the town of Forestville, which was where I went to school. And in the same house from about 1950 until I moved away as an adult, and my parents still had that same house for the rest of their lives. So it was a fairly stable location on a farm.
You grew up out in the country, I guess, then what you're saying?
Right.
Where did you attend elementary, middle, high school, and high schools?
My full 13 years through high school, including kindergarten, were in the Forestville Central School District.
Did you go to college or somewhere, and when?
Yeah, I got a undergraduate degree, a BA in mathematics from Alfred University in Alfred, New York. And then after that, I went to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where I got a MS degree in computer sciences.
What was your first job that you had before college even maybe, and then?
Well, the obvious first job was working on the farm, which was what consumed most of my spare time, even through college. And so that was a fairly...
Well, you were working at the farm while you were going to college, kind of help put yourself through.
Right. I mean, from when you're a kid, basically, if you grew up on a farm, you worked on the farm. And I pretty well did that, through high school, through college, and up until the point that I left home, which was, it was a stint in the Army, which I could go off and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
what years were you in the service, and what branch, and where did you go?
Okay. I was in the Army, and I went in the very end of 1970 and got out almost 2 years later, 1972. I was, for most of the time, I was stationed at Fort Bliss, which is El Paso, and was involved with the Air Defense Artillery branch of the service.
Did you have to go over to Vietnam or any of the Asian areas when that's kind of in the time that was going on?
It was during the time that was going on, but no, I was at Fort Bliss and stayed there pretty well for the whole time I was in. I did basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey. After that, I went to Fort Bliss for advanced individual training, unit training, more training, and when my unit moved to Fort Hood, and I had not enough time left to go with them, so I stayed behind and became an assistant instructor for other recruits who were coming in, and that was how I finished off the balance of my time.
You were discharged from?
I was actually discharged from Fort Bliss.
Now then, did you move back to New York, or did you stay in
At that point, when I left, I went to New York, but then I went back to Madison, Wisconsin to pick up where I left off in graduate school. So I actually finished graduate school in 1975, and after that I got a job in San Antonio, a year or so, up in the Dallas area. And I've been in the Dallas area ever since.
To Dallas then?
Texas Instruments moved me up here from San Antonio.
Yes. What department did you work in there, and what did you do while you was TA? You talked about that earlier. It's very interesting.
Most of the time that I was at TI, I was in computer software applications that were used internally by what was then called the equipment group, Then it changed names later on, but basically it was the defense business part of the company. And I worked on systems that kept track of part configurations, locations, and basically tracking the manufacturing process. And then later on I got involved with direct automation applications where we were involved with the physical production of fabricated parts. And that was the bulk of the time that I spent there. There were a few stints of shorter term where I was in other parts of the company.
Was that mostly then here in the Dallas area, then the Dallas TI plant?
Yes, it was all in the Dallas area, various locations. I've lost track of the number of physical locations I was actually in. I've spent quite a lot of time at the Expressway site over here in Richardson, but ended up in Plano, Carrollton, Dallas, a few other places as well.
How many years did you wind up with at TI?
I actually worked there from '76 until '98, and I was in 1998. They spun off the group that I was in, sold it to another company, and then that company did a big reduction in force. So at that point, I was semi-retired from TI at that point. I took a couple other jobs as intermediates for a while in there, but yeah, ultimately, at least by the books, I'm actually retired from Texas Instruments.
Do you still do some consulting work for them or any places, or you pretty much
No,
removed?
no, I have pretty well gotten out of any involvement with software at this point. Some of the other jobs that I took were, partly related to the work I'd done at TI, and it was just, I forget now, 5 or 6 years ago was the last part-time job that I had that related to computer software.
Do you live here in Sachse, in the Sachse area, or in Sachse?
I've lived in Sachse since 1982. I had lived in Garland for half a dozen years when we first came to the area, and then I moved out here to get a little more space, and I've been in the same house for 31 years now.
Getting used to it.
Yeah, finally getting acclimated.
Well, do you feel that Sachse is a good place to live or work, and would you encourage folks to move here?
Yes, of course, a lot of it depends on just what somebody is looking for as to the kind of atmosphere they like to live in. There are, I'm sure, large groups of people this simply would not be a suitable place, but if you want to have a good single-family residence and a nice neighborhood, this is really a good place, and I've been happy with my choice to have been here.
What do you feel that our city is doing well, and what do you think that the city could do better to help our
Gosh,
citizens?
I could probably write a book on that.
Briefly, maybe.
Well, by and large, I think they're doing a fairly good job. There are certain things that I think require a little more attention or deserve a little more attention than they're getting, and some other things that probably get too much emphasis. But overall, I think they're doing a fairly good job. I think that, as far as, maintaining control over budget and a lot of the quality of life issues are the main things that the city needs to pay attention to, and by and large they are. There are a lot of little nitpicky sort of things that I think don't get attention, but they probably would deserve it, that would help quality of life. But those things tend to get lost in the big picture, and the big picture things mostly they do a fairly good job of.
Would you tell us about organizations that you've been associated with and any that you're currently involved in? I know you've been to the Fall Fest, and we can talk about that in a little bit of detail, and the Historical Society. Are there others that come to mind that?
Well, to kind of start backwards from my current involvement, the Historical Society is really the only thing that I'm actively involved with at this point. But going back to the, earlier years that I was here, there was an organization, and it was called Citizens for Progressive Sachse, CPS. That was probably one of the first that I was involved with, and it was a community service type organization, and it was the point where the genesis of Fall Fest began. The idea of having Fall Fest was brought to that organization by one of the members, Pat Wilson, and ultimately that was spun off, you might say, or created as its own entity, the Fall Fest Association, and so I was involved with both of those.
Who all were on the group? Who remembers that first group?
The first Fall Fest group?
No, the community.
The CPS.
Uh-huh.
Well, let's see. Larry Holden was, one of the key people.
He was mayor at the time.
I don't remember if he was mayor at the time or if that was before he was mayor. He probably already was at that point. I'd have to go back and look at dates and records to say for sure. Kay Snipes was quite involved with it.
We might want to wait.
We'll wait for the train. Anyway, CPS, it was originally formed largely through the efforts of Larry Holden. Kay Snipes was involved with it. Dee Shanklin. I was. My wife, Marie, was. I already mentioned Pat and Tommy Wilson were involved. There were others, I'm sure, but those are the names that are immediately coming to mind as having been involved with it.
Did you run an event like what is now the Fall Fest for a couple, 3 years, and then?
No, the first real Fall Fest was, done under the Fall Fest organization. We had done a few little community things. It was mainly being involved with other activities that were going on. It was like being one of the participants. And we did do some, I've forgotten what it was called now, but it was basically a community dinner. We would, just literally say, gee, we're having dinner. Everybody in town's welcome. And we just kind of, do some, not quite potluck, but we would, members of the group would prepare some sort of a meal, and we'd get, 25 or 30 people would show up, and it was sort of a way to draw people out. And so I remember that as one of the, specific things that we did. We'd be involved with the community cleanup campaigns and, some of those sorts of things. So it was just kind of a group to kind of stir people's interest, get things.
And that is what the Fall Fest came from, so.
Yeah, the main legacy of that group is that Fall Fest came into being. The Fall Fest organization was started with considerable overlap of the original Fall Fest committee and that group. And then, of course, Fall Fest went on and is now, run by the chamber. So that's,
you were one of the original incorporators of the Fall Fest group, I believe.
Right.
Did you remember who all, was it the same group that was with the preceding organization?
That was some of the same people. The actual first chairman or president, whatever the title may have been, of the Fall Fest Association was my wife, Marie. She was the I'm not sure how to phrase it, but she was the central person, the key person to getting it organized, incorporated, and that was that came about largely as a result of the Wilsons asking her to do it. Pat Wilson, although she had most of the ideas on how to approach it to start with, she really felt that somebody else would probably be a better person for doing the organizational part of it and getting people involved. And so they actually came and asked Marie if she would do it. And that's how that came to be. Was
it held at Salon Park when it started, the first couple?
Yes. I mean,
it was afterwards.
At that time, basically, that was the only park we had. Salmon Park was referred to by most people as the ball field. And that name was almost synonymous in those years. And we had one fairly decent field up near Williford Road, and then the backfield was generally just referred to as a practice field because it wasn't in as good a shape. But that was the space that we had to work with, and originally kind of the outfield and the main field was used for most of the games, and I've forgotten, I think the Blues may have actually been in the infield that year. And over time, things sort of got shuffled around and moved, but we continued to use that park until Heritage Park was available.
Yeah, there was actually discussion about moving back to Solomon Park because until the Wish was finished and Freeway was finished, Solomon Park you could see it. Heritage Park is a nice park, but it's up until the last couple of years it's basically hidden.
Well, and one of the problems with the choice of the two parks is the question of parking. And when we had it at Solomon Park, the parking had to be in the park as well. And in fact, I think that some of the area that was more far right field and over towards the creek was used as public parking. And so that was an important consideration on the how to use things, is where you put people when they showed up. And the volunteer fire department was an organization that took on that part of the task. As I recall, they manned the parking lot and maintained that control, which was good because they kind of had crowd control as part of their normal needs and training.
An authority figure kind of helps
Right.
people won't pay attention to.
So.
Well, how long did you work with the Fall Fest, you and your wife? 'Cause she was the first, basically the first president, sort of, in a sense the title might not be exactly that, but head person leader.
I don't remember. There were several years that it was kind of, well, if you look at the history of Fall Fest, you'll kind of find that there was one group that kind of took the job for several years, and then there was kind of a transition to another group, and then they did it for several years, and then kind of another group took over. And I was involved basically during that first group, and I don't remember whether that was 3 years or 4 or 5 or something like that. And then some other people came in and kind of, helped with the continuation, applied their ideas and so on. And during that period, my involvement became less. And so since then, I've sort of been there as part of one of the participating groups, depending on what thing I was involved with at the time. Like the last few years, I've been there with the Historical Society and kind of helping with that. But as far as the exact number of years and when those transitions were, I don't remember.
I remember that far back. Well, the Fall Fest has been around 26. I can't remember now. We had an anniversary of that.
It's
26 or 7, I believe, isn't it? It's a little over the Historical Society.
I don't remember.
I would like to see it.
Yeah.
We got all papers. So then you've been involved in the Historical Society recently, real heavily. When did you get involved with that initially?
As I recall, I was probably a member when it first started, but not really heavily involved. I sort of participated in some things and would come to the annual meeting and so on. I did that for a few years, and then really the direction the Historical Society was heading for a while, I lost interest. And I don't even remember if I've maintained continuous membership or not, but I sort of for a while. And then really after the museum got started and there started to be some things going on that I could help with, then I started to get involved again. And that's kind of when we started getting the machinery set up in place and working on getting permanent displays and so on in here.
I know the tractor has been something you've been intimately involved with, and it's been restored and working, and you drive it to the meetings and the parades, and then that's a really interesting and nice thing. When did all that start, and kind of give us a little background into the tractor?
I don't remember exactly the years on some of this either. We could probably find some of it by going back and looking at records. But when I first came out to Sachse, there was a gentleman lived out here named Devon Reed, and he was very active in the volunteer fire department, and that was mainly how I even knew who he was because he was involved with it. And he had a good-sized garden and had gotten this Alice Chalmers tractor to use in his garden. And so that would have gone back to before I was in town, I'm sure, which means it goes back to 1982. It was an old tractor when he got it. I've heard a couple of different versions of where it came from, so I'm not sure where he got it. One of the stories I heard was that it was originally used in the cotton compress in Garland. It was used to move carts with cotton bales around. Also, I had heard that he bought it from somebody up in McKinney. So I don't know whether the tractor came from Garland or came from McKinney. And in fact, both of those stories may be true. It could be that it was in use in Garland and a used tractor dealer in McKinney acquired it and then sold it to the Reeds. But anyway, whatever its origins, I mean, it's a 1939 model, and in the 1980s and 90s, he was using it in his garden. And then he hit a point where he was ready to sell it and, divest himself of his gardening equipment. I don't remember what year that was either, but Paul Head, who was on the city council at the time, bought it from him just for something to play with. And I think they used it in a couple of the Sachse parades and so on, probably the parade at the beginning of ball season and so on. So he dabbled with it for a year or two, and then it sat in his backyard for a little while. And he was getting ready to move out of town and decided to sell the tractor. And so he said that it was for sale for a little while, and nobody immediately jumped out and grabbed it. And he, having been involved with the Historical Society himself, decided that it would be a good idea to just give it to the Historical Society. And so that was how it came to the society, was that Paul Head, who had been president of the Historical Society, I'm not sure whether he was at the time he did that or not, but he certainly had been recently before. And so he said that we could have it. And so Lloyd Henderson, Joe Stone, and I went down and got it, and hauled it up here to the museum. And that was kind of the way it sat for a while. It had, bad tires and no paint to speak of, and although it had been running in relatively recent history, it certainly was not in running condition when we got it. And that's typical of many things that museums acquire. And of course, what would happen in a lot of cases, something like that would continue to sit there and deteriorate. And we decided that we ought to be able to get it running again. And so we, as we got time, we started working on it, tried to at least evaluate what it would take to get it running. And it was mostly Lloyd and I that did that. And so we gradually worked on it, got it into running condition, and we got the tire store up in McKinney gave us a new set of rear tires for it, which we appreciated greatly. And those were the main things it took to get it into running condition. We're just some dabbling sorts of things and some tires.
I know the kids like to sit on it, and just older kids too, even adults. I see pictures of people coming here taking pictures on it at the Fall Fest and different things. It's nice to. How do you think? I know there's been discussion about maybe building an enclosure or a shed or cover or some other kind of help and protect it from the elements. How do you think that we should move on that? Is that something that you think is a good idea, or
Yeah,
at least where people can see it maybe and touch and feel it and all that, but.
I think it needs something to protect it. Sitting outside like that basically isn't good for a piece of machinery as far as trying to keep it in running condition. And so it needs to have some sort of shelter. And I know that within the society there have been several discussions and different ideas proposed as far as what would be a good way to give it some protection but still keep it open so that the public can see it. The two main options are to do something similar to the shelter that we have for the fire truck, where you just put a roof over it and have open sides, and that gives you enough with the roof being larger than the tractor, would give it reasonable protection. Another possibility, one that I had suggested at one point, was to build something that would be more similar to what a machinery shed might have been in the same time frame when it would have been a current piece of equipment. Say in the 40s or 50s, it was fairly common for machinery sheds to have a roof and maybe have 3 sides and be open on the 4th or something like that, that would actually provide a little better protection but still provide access. And there's some advantages and some disadvantages of using that approach in this kind of a museum setting. But that it's going to take one or the other of those two basically to protect it.
Probably needs something so it won't just sit out and become unusable.
Right. When it rains, you have the opportunity for rain to get into the various mechanical components, and it's not good if you don't have it sheltered. You really need to do a lot more maintenance to keep it in shape, and that tends to not happen in this environment either. So if you can minimize that, it probably helps.
I know you've been instrumental in categorizing and cataloging a bunch of the other items around here. I know we've got a list of all those which are put online too, but what other items do come to mind that are kind of significant in your opinion and something most notable?
Well, if you actually go out and look at the display, we've got somewhat of a coherent pattern to the way the machines are placed. If you start next to the museum, you'll find plows and things that are used to till the soil. And then as you move further around, there are some things for planting seed, and then we have some harvesting equipment. So to a certain extent, if you walk from one end to the other, you're walking the season from spring until fall. So I think the organization and placement probably is as important as the individual items that we have. We do have a couple of fairly unusual things out there that may not be noted that much. There's one thing there that is what many people would call a tumblebug, which is kind of a catchy, folksy name for it, but it is a slip scraper that is used to move soil from one place to another. And actually we have 2 scrapers. One is originally probably was horse-drawn, and the other one was definitely designed to go behind a tractor. And the tractor-drawn one was made by the Killefer Company, which is a company that has long since been swallowed up by a larger company. And it's kind of an unusual piece, and it's not the kind of thing that a farmer would use as routinely as they might some of the other machines, but they would use it for digging ponds, ditch work, and that sort of thing. And so it's kind of a more rare piece than some of the others that we've got out there. Some of the other things, we've got a mowing machine and a dump rake for raking hay up and so on that are really quite common, and they're interesting pieces and certainly pieces of the story, but they're much easier to find than a few of the others that we've got out there.
There's a pretty good collection for a museum this size. It seems like it's been well maintained. Seems like it's organized. And what projects, events, or other memorable activities do you recall as part of the Sachse Historical Society? We've had the Veterans Day, and we have the annual meetings, and we've had the Fall Festival we participate in. Are those some that primarily come to mind? Are there any others that you think of that over the years that...
No, there really isn't anything else that I recall the Historical Society being involved with. Of course, the annual meetings have changed over the years and evolved, and the location has changed. I know that some of the early meetings were held in the library in a meeting room. This is the library that currently, as of 2014, is a senior center, and the room that was the southeast corner of the building was originally set up as a meeting room, and it was divided off from the main part of the library by one of these pull-out walls, just one of these that expands out to divide it off. And that was the place the original, I believe the very first Historical Society annual meetings were held. So that was a much smaller location, and sometimes we could actually pretty well fill the room, but the size of the meetings and the size of the meeting place has certainly increased over time, so you can see that kind of a change. But there's always been some kind of a program associated with the meeting that has kind of remained constant.
What do you feel that the Sachse Historical Society should do to best preserve the history of Sachse and to inform those interested about our community? What do you think we could maybe improve on or change or do better or more of or less of, or what direction should we point our efforts in?
Yeah, outreach is always difficult. It doesn't seem to matter what the organization is or what kind of a goal you're doing. Getting the attention of the community is always a challenge. And I think that we need to try different approaches and see which things work best, because maintaining the status quo, our growth is going to be limited. But putting displays out where people will see them, getting information where basically we're going to them rather than them coming to us is going to be, I think, key to growth of the society and being able to support the things that we are already attempting to do and trying to complete.
You mentioned kind of a traveling exhibit of sorts, places. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Having places at the bank.
Yeah, I think that can be a big help, is to do traveling displays, because more people are going to walk past a display at the library than are going to come here in a given day. And so if we can get a display and put some artifacts in it and maybe a computer display so that people can follow up on things that pique their interest when they see the cabinet, I think that may draw a higher level of interest. I mentioned the library. There are a lot of other places that would be candidates for doing some of these displays. You got City Hall, you've got bank lobbies, some businesses might be appropriate to do it. It's even a possibility to put a display in a church and leave it there for a little while. And for some of these, it might be a good idea to tailor some of the displays to where we're putting it. I mentioned churches. There are a lot of things that are church-related history in the museum, and maybe something that shows history of the churches in town might be an appeal to some of the current churches. Of course, that you may have to be careful about picking things from the wrong denomination, but they may not want displays that don't match their organization, but it depends on the individuals that are involved. They might be amenable to it. If you put a display in the bank, get some of the things that are business related and put them there. If you're going to put something in the library or a school, have something that's school related. It may be a way of generating a higher level of interest by tailoring the displays to the particular audience. I don't know whether it'll work or not, but it's certainly something to consider trying.
Yeah, like you mentioned, we have to try some things, see some things work you don't think would work, some things that you think that couldn't possibly fail. Having the product out in the public is probably going to generate more visibility.
Looking back over recent years, we've probably gotten more exposure that has done us good at Fall Fest than any other individual thing we've done. And if we can have displays at Fall Fest that catch people's attention, like last year we did with the tractor, having it a key part of the booth, that will help. If we draw people into the booth and they see something they're interested in, you might pick up some more support.
We've had the veterans been here the last, I believe, 3 years.
I think this will be the fourth year this year.
Of course, I was not a veteran personally. I know my dad was, you were, others, and it seemed to me like it's a wonderful thing to honor our veterans and our families and citizens here in the area. Do you think that's something that we should continue to do? Should we try to build on it? What should we do if we build on it? If we do want to continue it, how do you feel we could get more participation, and what should we do or could we do?
Well, we have had pretty good participation in the past. Somewhat it seems like we're sort of doing the same thing over again and getting the same people over again. So I kind of wonder if we need to do something to mix it up and maybe get some other attractions or other interests involved. I'm not sure how you do it in that kind of an event. It has somewhat the risk of falling into the, it's just something we do every year and the same 12 people show up and so on and so on. And so I think we need to give some thought to what can we do to draw other people or get some other attention. And I'm not sure what the answer to that question is, but I think it's a question we probably need to be looking at this point.
Yeah, I know we have one scheduled again for this year, and it's some number of months away, but we got, it'll be reported on. It'd be good to have somebody else. I think it does seem like it's becoming, it is a pretty well attended event for where we have it,
Right.
But
But it's something that I think we need to kind of think about, what can we do that will improve it or draw some different people and so on. And I'm not sure what you do to address that.
Are there any other events like that that might be worth, the Veterans Day is a really kind of unique to our country, whatever. Are there any other events or projects or something similar that you think of that we might could start with or pick up and go with or initiate? Or?
I don't really know what those would be. One thing that has occurred to me, and this comes back very close to the Veterans Day event, is the Memorial Day event that has been done at City Hall. That's another one of those activities that sort of, I think, can kind of hit the doldrums after a few years. And it's not our event, but I wonder if it's something that we could help with. Mm-hmm. Maybe if we, were to kind of work with the people that organize that, and, might be able to kind of raise the attendance and raise the visibility of it. And there are other, other things, other holidays and so on that, we can be, involved with and address one way or another. But I haven't really thought that through too thoroughly as to what those might be.
Well, I know the Veterans Day is and Memorial Day both. I think the city has helped with the Memorial Day event here, and then we could probably return the favor by helping at the, they've had with the Veterans Day, we could have with Memorial Day, I believe.
Right.
You have about reached the point in time where you're going to be moving from our area.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your future, as you said here.
Okay. Well, yeah, we are, about ready to move, making some of the motions towards doing it already, but it's going to be a little bit warmer outside before we can really do the move. We're going to be going to central Minnesota, which is the area that Marie is from, and she had been spending, trying to spend as much time in the summer up there as she could, and so just kind of felt like, maybe just moving there would make that easier. And so instead of having the cold winters up there or versus the hot summers down here, that's kind of the trade-off on the move.
Cold winters up there. What was it like yesterday?
I don't know what it was like yesterday, but I was up there recently and it was well below zero the whole time I was there. And
oh, by the way, where did you and Marie meet? We kind of
we sort of skipped over that.
She's kind of an important part of this life.
We actually met in Madison, Wisconsin when I was in graduate school. When we both were in graduate school.
Was she in computer science also, or math, or
No,
some field, or?
her degree is in nutrition, dietetics, and which gave her the opportunity. The first job she did was at a hospital, working on menus for people that were in the hospital with various conditions and so on. And she did that for a little while. And when we came to Dallas, she ended up working for the Visiting Nurse Association, which did in-home visits for people with nutrition problems. And then after that, she got a job with the city of Dallas in the WIC program, which is a federal program, Women, Infants, and Children. And ultimately, she was in charge of that for the city of Dallas. And that was where she retired from, was the city.
Mm-hmm. And so her family pretty much lives in Wisconsin, where you're...
Minnesota.
Minnesota, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Minnesota.
We met in Wisconsin, but she
yeah.
was from Minnesota. And she has some of her family are in the same general area where we're moving to.
When do y'all anticipate getting moved?
Soon, whatever soon means.
Sometime this year?
Yeah, I'm kind of watching the snow levels, and when the snow is mostly out is going to be about the time I start moving things again.
Are there any other items that you think that you would like to include in this? Something that you might, ideas for our...
Well, I could say a little bit about my involvement with city government, which is something
Yes.
that we really haven't touched on. When we moved out here, which was late part of 1982, at that point there had just been a big commotion over the Hilltop condominiums, which are the apartments on Murphy Road. And it had been one of these things where the people in the neighborhood weren't aware that there were any plans to build apartments, and then all of a sudden, all kinds of excitement broke loose over those plans. And that had all kind of calmed down just before we moved here, but it was still a current issue. And as a result, the city council, and in fact mostly under the suggestion and guidance of Eldon Gordon, who was on the city council at that time, decided that it would be a good idea to form a citizen group to do some planning and look at the bigger picture of planning as opposed to the details of zoning for the city. And so they put out a request that they, I think, mailed to everybody in town to see if there was interest in being on or working with a committee to look at growth issues. And being new in town, I thought, maybe I'll go up and see what's going on. And so while I was there trying to quietly just see what was going on, somehow I ended up chairing that committee. And we had, well, it was another one of these things where, 15 or 20 people show up, a dozen show up for the second meeting, and by about the third meeting you got, maybe half a dozen people that are left doing whatever it was you were trying to accomplish. And that was where I think I first ran into Larry Holden. Elaine Gore was one of the other people that showed up and contributed heavily to it. And so we worked kind of as an ad hoc committee reporting to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the council. And we spent several months working on this, and we created basically a map that kind of showed uses of various parts of the city. And it was the first master plan of the city that was actually created by people in the community. There had been an earlier master plan that was one of these things that apparently had been some higher level government funded activities, and so some expert came in from somewhere else and looked at things and drew some pictures and published a couple of big books that were probably mostly cut and pasted from some standard text that they had somewhere, and that was, viewed as being some kind of a master plan. And we did get some use out of some pieces of that for the work we were doing, but like I say, ours was the first one that was actually done by members of the community.
Was that what is now maybe an updated version of the future land use agreement? I know that's...
Ultimately, yes, it has gone through a number of replans and redos, which you have to do periodically to keep it current. And but yes, the current master plan map really has roots going back to our committee. Interestingly enough, we made our version of it, and then the city council had to make a few changes to it before it was approved and change some things. And then over the years, it kept changing and evolving and looking a little less like what we started with. But I'm kind of proud of the fact that I think if you go back and look at our original version, it probably is the closest match with what you actually see out there today compared with anything that is done as a plan since.
Was there concern about more apartments moving in? Is that kind of what prompted it? Or I know there's some issues.
That was kind of what prompted it, although by the time we were working on this, there had been a new zoning ordinance created that absolutely banned apartments. So apartments at that point were totally off the table. Now that's been changed since then, but that was actually what ended up out of that.
Well, the apartments you're talking about there on Murphy Road by Dr. Mobius.
Yes.
Okay.
Between the veterinary office and the bank.
Bank up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the original plans were to build a whole lot more than what's there. And then by the time things were done, they ended up, they actually restricted them to what they had already started, plus whatever they started in a certain time period. And it happened they didn't start any in that time period, so there are only 2 buildings there instead of 6 or 8.
Well, that's was that back then still a city limit? I believe the eastern side is Sachse, the other side is Garland or Richardson. Garland.
Yeah, the city limits is actually in Murphy Road, and it already was that way at that time. The city limits have expanded quite a bit since then in some of the other directions, but that part has been.
But that was still opposite to Sachse.
Yeah, that part's been the same. So anyway, that was how I got involved with city politics and planning and so on in the first place. And after that, I went on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Started in 1985. I went on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Then in 87, I was elected to the city council, stayed there for 6 years until 93. After that, I spent 2 more years on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And since then, I've been on a few other assorted things. I was involved with one more revision of the master plan a few years ago, and a few other things.
Were you on the bond committee?
No, I was not. I was never on one of the bond committees, and I was not on the city charter committee either. Although Marie was the original city charter, she's one of the signatures did. So we've kind of had our thumbs into quite a few things in town.
Council meetings and different things about it. Then you were on the council what years?
From 87 to 93.
Were there term limits at that time?
I'm trying to remember. The term limits has kind of come and gone a couple of times, and I don't believe that at that time there were any term limits. And then term limits, I think, were put into the original charter and then taken out of one of the later revisions. So it has kind of gone back and forth.
Well, are there any other items that you'd like to mention? Things that you'd like to encourage us to do or not to do, or commendations?
I don't know that I have anything else that I really am thinking of right at the moment. I've probably got a lot of stories I could tell, but you know, there's probably a limit to how far we want to go, at least in one session. But I think we've had, you know, maybe the highlights of things.
I would like to, you know, when the weather will better do the little tour of the equipment out there.
Yeah, we need to do
Tractor
that.
Particularly any of the other equipment. I know we've got it cataloged and, but still having someone explain it, like you mentioned about, I didn't even know about, didn't think about the sort of chronological order, if you want to call it that, of the way the stuff is set up.
Progressing through the season, yeah.
And that's really interesting. Well, Jim, I appreciate your time, and thank you we appreciate all you've done, and it's been a pleasure to know you and your wife and get to be around you guys.
Okay.
Wish you the very best.
All right, thank you.